All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started. There's a couple folks still connecting to audio, but we'll take care of the fun housekeeping stuff first. So first of all, thank you all for attending. Our webcast today is going to walk through the digital risks that your businesses face across the open, deep, and dark web, and some recommendations on what you can do to protect your organization from those risks. A few housekeeping items before we get started here. One, as you probably noticed, your phones are going to be muted for the duration of the webcast to eliminate background noise and make the quality of the recording good. But if you have a question at any point during the presentation, we encourage you guys to submit those. We do have time allocated at the end to cover as many questions as we can. So submit those in the Q&A panel, which you find on the lower right-hand side of the WebEx console. If you have any questions for me specifically, you can send a private chat to the host as well. Along with that, you may experience audio or video issues throughout. Again, you can either message the host privately or you can email info@DigitalShadows at any time and we'll get you sorted. I'd like to introduce our presenters for today. Nick Hayes is joining us, who is a senior analyst with Forrester Research, and Rick Holland, who's VP of Strategy here at Digital Shadows, is going to present along with him. So I will pass the ball over to Nick, who's going to go first.
All right, thank you very much. Really happy to be here and to talk to you today about how to protect your firm from digital risks across the open, deep, and dark web. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. There's so much happening, so many issues that are taking place, and new, threats that are emerging as part of this. Just to give a little background, this is an area that I've spent a lot of time covering. I'm a senior analyst on the security and risk team here at Forrester Research. Actually worked with Rick Holland when he was back at Forrester a couple of years ago. So getting back to the team for this webinar. In any case, really happy to be here and to talk about this topic. What we really want to talk about here today is to explore what these issues are, what these risks are, and what you can do about them, and really talk about 3 core steps of mapping, mitigating, and monitoring digital risks to better protect your organization. So when we're talking about digital risk, obviously this is a term that's coming up and being used more frequently, but still, the way it's being used and the definition is often fairly vague and means a lot of different things. So I wanted to start by just level setting on what we're here talking about. So digital risk is the idea that there's exposure to malicious and inadvertent events that occur online on any social, mobile, or web channel that directly impact your business, your brand, or your employees in the public domain. The point here is that we're looking for events that, again, have that direct, immediate impact to your organization, but it can be issues ranging from brand and reputation issues, cyber risk that we'll talk a lot more about, as well as physical safety issues that may be discussed through these different digital channels, and how through this, how you can better monitor and by doing so, better protect your organization. So in three stages here, this is what we'll focus on. First, I'll talk a little bit about why digital risk disarray is just worsening, why the challenge is getting harder to handle and deal with today than it has been in the past. Secondly, what can we actually do about that? How can we better protect our organizations from digital risk? And then finally, what we can do to advance our program past these steps or implement them more effectively. So the problem here is that you know it's bad today, but I want to highlight just some of the extreme issues that really are coming up. This is an actual example where the Pentagon is really worried about the use of social media by different threat actors and malicious groups that are using social media in a number of different ways to basically mask different types of traffic and defame organizations and really becoming a major threat to organizations in a number of different ways. In this particular case, it's a picture picture of Britney Spears, which seems not like a threat, but actually through this Instagram post was actually used as part of a command and control piece of the cyber attack where the infected devices would, through a specific Trojan, would actually go and search this Instagram feed for specific usernames and for specific links to where they can find compromised servers to get further actions and where they can exfiltrate data. And this has been an issue that's plagued both government organizations as well as regular organizations as well, because when those infected devices are communicating through social media, the traffic is masked as such, so it's difficult to pick up on in that specific case. It's also bad when fake mobile apps that seem benign are taking over phones and infecting them, and also misrepresenting brands. This is a big issue for a number of organizations across industries, banks, retail, you name it. There's issues with it in terms of it really being both kind of a brand issue in terms of there being a number of impersonating rogue accounts that are trying to steal customer account information or trying to basically essentially make money off of the customers. And so in many cases, they try to act like a specific mobile app that could either be like a game like I'm showing here. I'm showing Super Mario Run and some of the fake versions of it where once you install it, this is actually an Android version of Super Mario that didn't actually exist at the time because the Android version hadn't been released yet, but people were still downloading it to play the game and were giving all sorts of permissions for the app to control the device and asking for all sorts of information, including credit card information and, of course, stealing and monetizing that. And then on the right here, you see just a number of different mobile apps that were also infected with malware and were, again, stealing account information for different purposes. So just mobile apps, although we don't often think about some of the issues that come up with them, they are a new attack vector that is actually significant, both from a brand and reputation standpoint in terms of causing customers problems that think they're downloading a legitimate app and are, you know, of course, you know, there's a number of issues related to that, but also in terms of it being related to your employees and to others that could potentially be downloading that and creating different compromised devices that get brought into your network. It's also bad when companies don't know when their emails are real or not. So this is something that happened recently to Macy's where customers and some non-customers were receiving these reset your Macy's password emails, and many of the customers reached out to Macy's saying, is this real? Is this an actual email or is this a phishing attempt? And Macy's wasn't able to say or validate whether it was real or not. They had to, you know, make sure that they would respond and basically make sure that people would go to the actual website and reset their accounts legitimately, not clicking on that password. But the fact that they couldn't actually determine whether whether there was a breach or whether their customers' information was compromised is a real issue, something that they've had to spend time and investigate, and by the time they were able to make that determination, it was already far down the line, and a lot of customers were extremely upset. And then this issue is actually really interesting, and one that you know, once loyal customers, they're turning to the dark web for help. So this is a case where John Deere, where many of the farmers that it's selling different types of farming equipment to, their customers are looking to the dark web to purchase different types of firmware from, well, of course, illegitimate firmware from the dark web to help basically unlock certain parts of the system on the tractor so that they could do small updates to the phone, to the physical device, the tractors. And in this case, many of the reasons for this was that the customers were upset at the prices that they were having to pay for simple, small updates, the amount of time it would take for the John Deere customer support to actually get out and help service the troubled vehicles. And when they would get there, they would install, and use a USB to update the firmware and then leave. So rather than paying those ridiculous amounts of money, they just would look to the dark web and use this, again, Ukrainian bootleg version of the firmware that acted fairly similarly. The problem here is that when you have this issue, not only is it diminishing the value of the way that John Deere is offering its services and selling its products, but in addition to that, it's creating potentially unsafe vehicles, quality issues that could get back to John Deere that they have to then invest more time and resources in. And overall, just a bad brand and reputational issue as well. Making matters worse, John Deere didn't know about this. They weren't looking for mentions of their organization. They didn't understand how many customers were actually searching for and purchasing this type of firmware from the dark web. Had they been monitoring it, again, they probably would have been able to identify and resolve the issue much more quickly than they were. So the whole idea here is that many of the issues I'm talking about is that your attack surface is expanding. It's no longer thinking about how you protect your IT environment or even think about how you're going to manage shadow IT, but how you deal with this whole external environments that expose your organization to real digital risks. Thinking about social media, social networks, thinking about mobile apps and devices, thinking about web, both from the open web, the index web, as well as the deep unindexed web, and finally the dark web. Across all these different areas, you also have to be thinking about how your third parties are potentially creating and making your organization even more vulnerable. And so you're losing control. So the idea here is that as you get farther and farther away from your IT environment, you lose control in terms of how you can actually both secure your organization, secure your infrastructure, your applications, your communications, et cetera, and the ability to remediate when things go wrong. And so that's what is even adding to this problem is not only is your attack surface expanding, it's the degree of control that you have over each of these issues or each of these elements is less and less. So, of course, for your known corporate-controlled digital footprint and your known digital assets, you have much more levels of control. But as you start thinking about how that actually plays out, even for your known corporate-controlled digital footprint, thinking about your own social media and branded social media accounts and mobile apps and websites, if they're compromised or in other cases impersonated or spoofed, you have to work with those digital channels and partners to make sure that the correct actions are taken in a quickly and timely fashion. But beyond that, you start getting to farther degrees of separation in terms of your control. You have unsanctioned rogue activity that occurs related to your affiliated footprint, but actually doesn't represent your organization or has gone around the policies and controls that you've set. Furthermore, you might have fraudulent or malicious spoofing impersonations. So again, when you have those cases, these are accounts that are created that pretend to look like you, pretend to look like your customer support services, or websites that they use as part of their phishing attacks. And all of that, you have less control in terms of how you can actually remediate, how you can take down those accounts, how you can blacklist or remove different types of websites and deal with them, particularly as you think about where they're hosted, on which channels, and ultimately who has the authority to actually remove it. And the legal aspects of it also come into play in terms of whether or not they are violating terms of service in some cases. And then finally, you have nefarious threats and mentions that are being mentioned or used to help coordinate an attack against your organization, not specific to your brand or image, et cetera, but are, you know, as part of this broad digital ecosystem, you know, there's a number of different places where these conversations are taking place that, again, put you in an even tougher position where you don't have that ability to really make sure that you're taking control of the situation. So with all of this, we have to figure out how to better protect our organizations from these digital risks. We need a better plan. This is about, I think, the plan that many organizations have today. What percentage of a plan do you have? I don't know, 12%. You know, I'm a big Guardians of the Galaxy fan, and this is a funny way to think about our role here, but in many ways, we are now the guardians of our own digital galaxy, if you will, and we have to be the ones constructing a plan for how to better protect our own organizations in it. And it's not an easy task, but something that we have to start thinking about how we're going to do a better job of this. And there are 3 core steps for what we can do, and that's map, monitor, mitigate. So I'll go into each of these in more detail, but at a high level, the mapping is thinking about all of the different assets, actors, points of presence, intellectual property, all of those elements that make up your overall business, your organization, your operations, and your key executives and personnel. And thinking about what those are, how you can identify what those are, and then how you can use that information to help better streamline the way that you monitor and search for violations or misuse of that data. And then secondly, once you have done that initial mapping and you start to understand how these different assets and attributes connect to one another, how they associate with one another, how they're interacting, then you can move on to the active monitoring. You can begin to scan for abuse based on the fact that you know what your major products and services are, what your major intellectual property or names of it or images related to it are. You can start to identify potential issues that can come up, again, as you start to think about the number of different types of events that can take place. You can patrol for targeted and coordinated attacks, data exfiltration, and build up better understanding through indicators of attack, assets, and account compromise. And then finally, after you've done that, you can think about what you can do to mitigate. How, when you discover an impersonation or a compromised account or an account that's been taken over, how you can take control and either make sure that you prevent those types of issues from taking place by enabling different types of security safeguards, or by ensuring that you expedite the remediation. You improve the incident response, improve the time to take down different issues, improve your methods and process for cease and desist requests, and thinking about that more holistically about how you're going to handle those known events. So diving into this approach more in a more detailed manner, the first step is thinking about mapping and thinking about that from the context of your organization. How can you classify your digital attributes for efficient mapping? And you can think about this both from a physical as well as a digital perspective. So you have physical points of presence, your storefronts, your manufacturing sites, but you also have your digital points of presence, your websites, your social media accounts, your mobile apps. And the same is true for all 4 of these categories. And so when you start thinking about actors, it's the physical placement of where your employees or personnel are going to be, where your customers are, where potential and likely cyber criminals or attackers may be residing, but also thinking about them in terms of their presence, their social media accounts, the way that they're interacting with your organization or representing your organization. And then thirdly, thinking about your other actual assets, your IP, your trademarks, your logos, your physical products that are being sold on e-commerce sites, your other marketing collateral that's being displayed on different digital banners, as well as other sensitive information, your potentially PII of customers or PHI, that if it gets exposed can result in major fines and, again, major costs to the organization. And then finally, how do they all connect together? How are they interacting? What are the relationships between one another? And how can you build up that context to build a better understanding of how these different actors relate to assets and relate to your points of presence? And also within mapping is thinking about how you are exposed and thinking about the categories for which you're exposed in. And if you break this down into 3 types of risk: brand risk, so anything related to your organization and your brand online, so impersonations, hijacking, even compliance violations where your employees are potentially violating your policies in a number of different ways. Thinking about trademark or intellectual property abuse, all of these fall and relate back to the business and to your brand and have both reputational fallout as well as potential operational consequences. Your cyber risk, probably the one that we all know best, but thinking about particularly breaking it down into the different phases of a cyber attack, how you can start to categorize your exposure to data reconnaissance, to your exposure to particularly your high-level employees or people, your finance department or IT admins with high levels of access to sensitive information. So thinking about that as well as other parts of the cyber attack and exposure to exploits, as well as other types of discrete threat coordination that could be taking place on the dark web. And then finally, I've talked about this a fair amount, but thinking about how you're thinking about physical risk, how you're going to monitor for different types of issues or events that could be actual issues for your organization, whether it's the safety of your individuals as they're traveling or geopolitical events that affect your supply chain or operations. So all of this to say is that when we start thinking about a lot of what needs to be done, the mapping is an important first step, but it's all to serve the purpose of better ongoing monitoring, because that is the critical digital risk safeguard. What we have to start thinking about is how we can improve that mean time to remediation, how we can improve that time to detection, because the faster that you can identify an issue with your organization, the faster you can remediate it and ensure that the damage that is caused by that event is minimized. So when we're thinking about monitoring, we have to start thinking about, in many cases, technical controls. Automation is certainly a key piece of this. As much as we'd like to be able to monitor through in-house tools or using internal resources, there's a lot of challenges to that, particularly given the vast nature of what we're talking about and the consistency and continuous rate at which you need to be monitoring all of these different channels that we're talking about. So these are some questions that I suggest that you think about as part of your monitoring. So when you're thinking about how you monitor the open, deep, and dark web, how you monitor digital risk across all of these online channels, what are the data gathering techniques that you use to get the right information? If you don't have a way to monitor and gather this information in different ways, then the rest of what you do in terms of analytics, in terms of remediation, isn't going to matter. So when you're thinking about data gathering techniques, the 2 core pieces of this are access to different types of data and integrations, whether it's APIs, pay-for-access data, security, and intel feeds, as well as harvesting techniques, so data crawlers and bots, sensors, honeypots, things that help you actually collect that data. And I'm not necessarily saying that you will be doing this yourself, but do you have adequate capabilities to to actually bring that data in to your organization to assess it and analyze it for your business risks. And then secondly, what's your current visibility into different digital channels? So what's the scope in terms of, when you think about social media, we often think about Facebook or Twitter, but it goes far beyond that. It goes to different file sharing sites, to Reddit, to anywhere that people can potentially post comments about your organization or have conversations that, again, threaten your organization. So the scope of your social channels, the scope of your mobile app store coverage, how you're going to monitor the unindexed web, your coverage for dark nets as well as IRC channels and more. And then the frequency at which this is happening. How often are you scanning and monitoring for different types of digital risks that can come up? Is it weekly, daily, real time? Can you start to understand what level of frequency you need for different types of digital channels? And then the sophistication, that's the key third piece of this. How sophisticated is the monitoring and the techniques that you're using to help improve the visibility? How are you configuring false positives and negatives so that you only get the most relevant information? What are the other analytics and natural language processors and image recognition techniques that you can use to, again, improve the detection for different events that can affect your organization? Then, still within Monitor, just a few more questions to ask. Make sure that you're defining and thinking about your process, your roles, and the outputs. So, do you have formal processes to review workflows to determine risk severity? Do you have decision trees for common events and escalation? And then who within your organization is tasked with this? Do you have clear roles and responsibilities, someone that's held accountable, someone that's held responsible for this ongoing monitoring? And when you're thinking about this, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone within your organization, although someone within your organization would at least need to be the liaison for an external provider. But there are, of course, a number of different capabilities out there to think about who's going to do it and how, and thinking about whether you want it as a managed service or more as a configurable software as a service platform that you can review and work with the provider to improve and continue to enhance the detection on an ongoing basis. And then do you have subject matter experts that can, again, think about how to fine-tune the configuration and run investigations that might be longer term, that might need to be thinking about specific attack groups that you need to be reviewing and understanding their techniques, tactics, and procedures. And then finally, what are the common outputs? How do you want to visualize this? What are the data charts that you like, the other visualizations that you need? And what insight are they actually providing? Do they help you think more strategically about the way that you're going to improve or think about the way that you're going to advance your program over the next few years versus the operational ongoing insights and the tactical ways in which you can apply some of the information immediately? Lastly, the third stage is mitigate. Invest in better remediation and response capabilities. So I wrote and evaluated, conducted a Forrester Wave on digital risk monitoring. Digital Shadows was one of the vendors in this wave. And as part of this evaluation, there's a customer reference survey, and we asked those customers, all the customers that participated for all the vendors in it, what were the most important capability needs that drove you to adopt a digital risk monitoring solution? Now, it doesn't surprise me that monitoring for brand and reputational risks rises to the top. That makes a lot of sense, just the need to do that, to think about how your organization is represented, how you can detect different events on these channels. But what is really interesting and something that definitely you should be thinking about as well is the action that you take after the fact. How can you help improve the way in which you are going to take down and remediate different types of events, how you're going to take down fraudulent accounts, apps, and deal with different compromised websites or spoofed websites. So thinking about that action that you're going to need to take is certainly something that you need to think about, because a lot of the ways in which you need to interact and take action will require different relationships or integrations or partners with a lot of the major digital channels, social networks, mobile app stores, et cetera. And if you don't have that infrastructure in place in terms of having and maintaining those relationships, or knowing when a social media site goes down or is taken over, who you're going to reach out to that's going to prioritize your situation. So mitigate real digital risk events. So think about how you can enforce and prevent some of these issues and enforce controls of your corporate-owned accounts. So thinking about access controls, automated lockdown of your accounts based on specific behaviors, based on specific malware analysis and things like that that may help you detect malicious activity or malicious access. And then, assuming that the event has already taken place, what are some of the ways in which you can actually, again, take down and take action? And the two key areas within this mitigation piece is thinking about the relationships and integrations that you have with the digital channels that I mentioned, as well as the regional support, thinking about law enforcement and legal services in regions in which you may need specific services to actually effectively remediate some of the events that are taking place on these external channels that you don't have specific direct control over. So lastly, how can we advance our program? This is a key piece. I've talked a lot here, but I want to focus on some of the core things that you can do now. This obviously is not a strategy that we can take anymore. We cannot just comb the sand and try to find everything. This is a screenshot from Spaceballs the movie that I think is just a hilarious idea, but also indicative of the way that many organizations are still thinking about how they're going to deal with this problem, manually searching for different types of problems rather than thinking about how they can automate and produce more of a streamlined way of identifying key digital risks. So the first thing that we can do to help advance our programs and move past the ACE combs is to start looking at where our capability gaps are. So if we take this approach of map, monitor, and mitigate, where are your capability gaps as it relates to your social media coverage, as it relates to your mobile app coverage, as well as your web coverage, and in particular, your dark web coverage. In many cases, it seems that when you start talking about the dark web that you automatically think that you need manual investigation into many of these cases, but there are ways to automate and infiltrate many of the dark web areas in which you can actually get a lot of valuable information in a more efficient manner. So thinking about this and applying this type of process, you can determine, again, where you need to prioritize your efforts or prioritize improvements in your capabilities. And speaking of prioritization, prioritize risk remediation and response. The response is the critical element of all of this because these events will take place. So with that in mind, how quickly are you going to be alerted to it? It's going to be a much different situation if you are able to get on top of it and identify an issue first rather than an issue getting reported 3 or 4 days later by one of your own customers who's discovering issues related to their accounts. So think about how you can reduce the mean time to remediation. So mean time to remediation involves the detection, involves the mean time to know and understand the problem, and the mean time to fix and verify that you've successfully recovered. So as a part of this, you'll want to formalize teams and action plans for different risk events. So think about decision trees for different issues, how you're going to handle account takeovers, how you're going to handle impersonations, how you're going to handle a data breach. Secondly, formalize teams and processes for takedown requests and legal cease and desist letters, creating templates for common issues that come up again and again. And thirdly, think about the external stakeholders at major digital channels. Can you create relationships? Do you know who those people are, and create a contact list so that when these issues come up, you know immediately who to go to. And finally, I'm just going to leave you with some last tips for success. You know, thinking about everything we talked here today, obviously it's a lot. There's a lot. It's a huge problem. We're talking about a huge number of channels and threats that are all exposing your organization to a huge amount of risk and making your organization more vulnerable. So in terms of what you can do, and just to wrap up what I've talked a lot about, if anything, think about these three things. Think about how you can clearly define the primary scope and objectives of your digital risk efforts, outlining core use cases. So maybe you don't need to worry about specific areas of fraud or specific digital channels, because it's not an area that is a primary brand channel for your organization. So defining where you're going to prioritize your investment and resources to improve capabilities with those major points is going to help immensely. Secondly, develop strong cross-functional teams or steering committees. This is, again, because of the way in which digital risk occurs, we're talking about issues that really go across traditional boundaries. You know, just thinking about social media and mobile apps in particular, those involve marketing. They involve other app dev teams that are working on those apps. You're talking about other compliance issues that can come up, HR issues. There's so many different elements of this. So making sure that you have the right way of building a cross-functional team to deal with the different digital risks, and in particular, when an event has taken place, to initiate and execute on, initiate and kick off that cross-functional team to determine the right approach, the right decisions that you'll need to make is key to success. And lastly, prepare for an even more chaotic digital risk future. I wish I could say this is slowing down, but this is only accelerating. Issues are coming up related to augmented reality, related to artificial intelligence and chatbots being able to impersonate friends through different types of accounts and improve the social engineering tactics. So again, those are just a few of the issues that come up to mind right away, but there's going to be others that are even beyond that, that again create an even more chaotic and difficult challenge for your organization to remain secure and protected. So think about this and start implementing a lot of these features as quickly as you can, so that again, as this area evolves, that you're prepared for it. And with that, I'd like to thank you and turn things over to Rick.
Thank you very much, Nick. It's great to have you online with us today. It's a little surreal being a former Forrester analyst doing a webinar with a Forrester analyst. So I appreciate you kicking us off here. And I also really appreciate the Guardians of the Galaxy reference. I'm going to adopt that one. I'll give you credit for it, of course. But that's a great analogy. All right, and are you switching me to be presenter now as well?
Yep, you should have it. You're good.
All right, cool. So let me just build on what Nick talked about a little bit. First, a little bit about Digital Shadows, just for those that may not be familiar with us. We were founded in 2011. We just had our 6-year anniversary last month. We have 3 offices, 2 in the U.S. and 1 in London. And we've been operating out of the U.S. For about 3 years now. And Dallas is where I'm based, is where our U.S. intelligence operation hub is. We have over 100 customers now, and more than half of our customers are here in the U.S. Is there anything wrong with this picture? Would you characterize this as risky behavior? Now, I'm pretty sure this is a fake Alligator would be my guess. It's pretty large as far as alligators go, but we put ourselves in risky positions a lot. Sometimes we do it knowingly. So if this thing is for real, this guy's making a big mistake. And then sometimes we'll put ourselves in these positions unwittingly. We don't know that we're putting ourselves in a risky position. And one of the things that's been quite clear to me over my career is people not having enough visibility into their risks. And Nick has done a great job of defining this space, digital risk monitoring, helping raise awareness to all these risks that are beyond the perimeter that companies just don't know about. And what I wanted to do was build upon what Nick has been talking about. In the way that we look at digital risk. And we look at it in across 7 different categories, and these line well with what Nick was covering. And I'm going to go through them individually and go through a little bit of use cases and things that we're helping our customer with. I think those are the best ways to kind of illustrate the way a service works. First is cyber threat, and then data loss, brand exposure, something that Nick talked about a lot as well, third-party risk, also brought up, VIP exposure, physical threat, and infrastructure exposure. But let me dig into these as well. I like to use analogies too, and I love minions, and then I love hacktivists with minions together as far as a meme for them. This is a little hard to see, but this is basically a tweet from a hacktivist group, Anon Ghost, and it's a hashtag of Apocaris. So if any of you are in the financial services vertical, be it small or large, you'll likely be familiar with Apocaris, but it's a hacktivist movement against the banks, also against the stock exchanges. This is a tweet from week before last, and there's another campaign that has recently been launched here. The way that we'll help out our clients here in this case is we'll monitor the hacktivist groups that are out there. When they announce a campaign that's going to occur, we'll look at that. We'll alert our customers, but we'll give them context on top of that to say, look, this particular threat actor, whoever it may be, has made these claims in the past. They have intent, but they don't have capability. So we're helping people understand, do I really need to spin up my resources here? Is this a legitimate threat that I need to be concerned with? Maybe I need to go out and buy some denial of service mitigation capabilities beyond what I can do on-prem. So cyber threat for us, as one example, is where we bucket our threat intelligence capabilities. This is where we're providing that capability to our clients. Building on another example, and that's the John Deere one that Nick mentioned, is this piece from AlphaBay. And some of you are probably no doubt familiar with AlphaBay Market. AlphaBay is probably the #1 criminal location out there right now as far as marketplaces go. There's tons of other types of things on the dark web, but it's very, very popular. It's actually much like Amazon as far as their customer service and capability. But it's quite common that we will find things related to our customers being sold on AlphaBay or Hansa Marketplace or in a criminal forum someplace on the open web or on the dark web. And we'll alert them to it. In this case is actually a tool that you can use to bypass SMS. It's actually a good suggestion. You've probably seen some of the things in the news regarding to SMS. If you're using SMS for multi-factor authentication, you probably want to move away from it because it is highly vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks, people circumventing it. And this is what this tool is doing. In this case, at the bottom, you'll see in purple, I blocked out. That's the list of companies that this tool, the seller claims that they can use the SMS bypass against. And what we do in this case is we go out and we look at the seller. In this case, the seller has a positive reputation, just like you would see in Yelp and things of that nature. That kind of gets into the social media kind of aspects of this a little bit as well. And this could be a credible threat to our customers. So we're making them aware of this, just like in the John Deere example. You know, people are going to the dark web. That's a crazy one to me, to bypass their investment and buy something that could be likely Trojan. Another one that I wanted to dig into is data loss. And our data loss capabilities are quite broad, but there's one that I wanted to highlight in particular, and this is on credential exposure. Seems like last year was a pretty significant year for credential dumps. You had this very big significant ones that were publicly available, like LinkedIn. In this case, this is the Dropbox credentials. It's 68 million credentials that you can buy for only $102. So in this case, on the right-hand side, you see something, and of course the screenshot's not that large, but this is a credential stuffing tool. So basically you have this industrialization of credentials that's occurring with cyber criminals. So they'll take something like Dropbox that they buy for $100-ish. They'll plug in the credentials into this credential stuffing tool. That tool will then go out to, let's say, Digital Shadow's website as an example, hypothetical example. There's a login portal there, and it will just start trying the names here. In many ways, it's similar to maybe an in-map scan that's going out and looking for different ports. Are they up? It's something similar. So this is basically industrializing logging into your environment or doing account takeovers. And this is very key with our clients, is they want to know the credentials that are out there, especially for their consumers, and protect their digital business, protect the customers so they don't get upset. And in this case, we give context to our clients. So we'll say, this is the first time we've seen this particular credential. You should probably be concerned about it because you don't want to get a MySpace, a Dropbox, a LinkedIn credential that's from 2012 that the password's already been changed. Having been responsible for running password changes across an enterprise, that's not insignificant, and it's much more complex today if I force password changes unnecessarily because then I have problems with email on mobile apps, tablets, and things along those lines. Another example is on the mobile application risk. And now, Nick's already talked about this one, so I won't go into as much detail here, but I'll talk about what we do. The interesting thing here is I'll talk to a lot of clients and prospects that will say, no, we don't have mobile apps. And I will say, well, lo and behold, it looks like someone has created an app on your behalf and your consumers think you have a mobile app, and it could be doing malicious things. We rolled out this capability last summer to do mobile application analysis to see if it's malicious, is it privacy violations, things along those lines. This is actually something that we rolled out after the wave, the Forrester wave that Nick mentioned on digital risk monitoring, where we were leaders on that wave. That capability has come out. Nice thing that we'll do on top of this is we won't just tell you that an application is risky, we'll give context around it. So if we can tell who that application is communicating back to, perhaps we can build a story around maybe the infrastructure associated with the attacker. Maybe we can even build a story around the attacker and their goals themselves. Next one up is third-party risk. This is always a hot topic for security leaders and practitioners. In this case, I wanted to give an example of key suppliers, and this would apply more to a brick-and-mortar retailer here, but these are point-of-sales terminals. Here, what we can do for our clients is we can actually monitor for the third-party commercial off-the-shelf software that they use to see if there's vulnerabilities against them or people are selling exploits against them, so that you'll know that, hey, we use POS terminal A, it looks like there's some chatter here. Let me make sure, A, that I have the latest and greatest patch on it, and if not, let me talk to my supplier and make sure that we get that patched so we can avoid some of the fraud associated with point-of-sales terminals. This could also apply if you are healthcare and you were looking at healthcare devices. This could also apply if you're in the financial services and you were looking at Swift gateways and exploits against them. But really helping our clients understand when there's a vulnerability or chatter around targeting something that's very, very key to their business process and their digital business. Now, I threw this one in here a little bit to troll Nick. Nick and I are both sports fans, and he's from Boston. So unfortunately, despite him being a Patriots fan, we remain friends. But here's an example of spoofed profiles. Now, this is Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, this is here in Dallas. This is actually a pretty popular comedy profile that's out there. But imagine someone spoofing a profile of your leadership or your brand. We will see fake brand profiles with the exact same imagery. We can check the hashes on the files. It looks exactly the same. That's then linking out to a malicious site. We recently saw this where they were doing surveys. If you complete the survey, you would get a coupon, something that you might look for if you were using Retail Me Not or something along those lines. And then we look at the survey itself, and the survey is capturing email address, first name, last name, that sort of thing. And then in addition, it could be drive-by malware that's coming down from some of these as well. So if someone's out there impersonating your brand, you need to know about it because it could have, negative cyber implications, but it could certainly have negative implications on your brand if someone starts messaging in a way that's not consistent with what you want to take to the market. Another area that we dig into when it comes to digital risk is on physical threats. Now, here's an example of something that we found, a floor plan that we found on someone's home NAS drive. I'm actually at home right now, and I'm looking at my NAS drive. I know that if I plug my laptop into my NAS drive, it is not going to upload things to the internet. But we know the lack of security that's built into a lot of these, well, that's not necessarily an IoT device, but these devices that are public-facing. And here, we found exposed building plans. Other areas that we help our clients with when it comes to physical threats, it might be around a protest that's going to be planned against a physical office location. It might be related to an annual event that you have that generates 60% of your annual revenue, and it's very important to have an eye of what's going on to make sure there's not going to be any implications to people that are buying tickets attending the event, something along those lines. So we can help our clients there. We can also help our clients out with threats to individuals. So if someone wants to go after your CEO, Mr. Fake Jerry Jones in this example from the previous slide, you could do that as well. Next up, I want to talk about infrastructure. This one's very personal to me because I used to run vulnerability management programs, and at Forrester I covered vulnerability management as well. People are overwhelmed with patching and scanning. You can patch and scan all the things all the time and never reach the finish line. One thing that's particularly helpful here is for when something makes it into Metasploit, when you see chatter about exploits around a particular CVE, which is what's happening here. This is a forum where people are talking about a particular CVE, or actually a number of CVEs that they're going after. Helps give you context to say, look, there's exploits in the wild. I need to bump this up in priority. And maybe those devices that are 4 layers into my environment can be a little bit lower on the priority list, and I need to do all my public-facing things or all my laptop users, that sort of thing. So we're actually passively monitoring our client's infrastructure, understanding about their services, understanding about the versions of software that they're running, and then adding context around exploits in the wild with them. So how does this work, Rick? Well, let me take you behind the curtain. And this is where this slide, it lines up very well, I think, with Nick's map, monitor, and mitigate, and I'll talk about mitigate in the next slide as well. But basically, Searchlight uses 3 capabilities essentially to go out to collection. One is our own crawler. 2 would be APIs that we're plugging into, social media as an example, but many other APIs as well. And then we have humans that are helping do collection as well, because we realize you can't collect everything in an automated fashion. We use the humans in a surgical manner to improve the automated collection that we have. But essentially what we do is we'll map out the client's assets, and that's the digital attributes in Nick's terminology. And so we'll understand all the digital attributes that the client is interested in, and that could be their brand, their people, the mobile applications, things that we've both been talking about. And then we'll go out against these data sources there on the left, and that's open web, deep web, dark web, IRC channels, FTP, the mobile application stores, and we'll start monitoring them. And then we'll start raising things up to our clients for them, and then we'll help them with the mitigation that's out there. When you look at how we actually do this, one of the things that I think is really, really important, and Nick touched on this about some of the challenges of doing it yourself. Many organizations don't have the resources, or even if they had the resources, maybe it's not the best use of the resources. So at Digital Shadows, we take a technology-led approach with a human in the loop. So essentially what we're doing is we'll take in this funnel all the mentions of digital shadows that we find when we're going out and collecting, in this example of a customer. We use a series of automated analytics, rules processing, machine learning to decrease that number of mentions to something that we would present to the analyst. In here, in this hypothetical example, going from 500,000 mentions to just about 26,000 mentions, and then what gets actually sent to the analyst is 886. And then the analysts are in the loop, they're getting context, they're building that story, they're reducing false positives, which is something else that Nick said was a challenge for customers, and I agree with that. And we present 68 tailored incidents. So one of the things that I think is really important to call out is the tailored approach to it. When you get something that's made its way through that funnel, when we escalate it to our clients, it's going to be valid, it's going to be relevant to them. It's not going to be a question around, is this a threat intelligence feed that isn't relevant to me or to my business? And then the final piece that I wanted to highlight was the mitigate component, which I absolutely agree. It's not enough to just monitor and say bad things, you need to mitigate. So we actually launched a takedown service, a very comprehensive full service offering here. And this is also since the wave that Nick did with us, where we can help clients take down this malicious content. Some things like GitHub, a Pastebin site, those can be much easier. Sometimes you may have malicious things that are coming through a typo squat that's phishing your users, that you have to go through a much larger global network of lawyers working with the network hosting providers to take that down. And so we have a full-on takedown service to help those clients mitigate, again, because we want to reduce the friction for our clients. We just don't want to alarm. We want to help provide them answers and get things quickly taken down. Mean time to remediation was one of those really key statistics that Nick mentioned in his piece there. Now, I know we have probably time for a couple questions. Let me hand it back over to Anna.
Thank you, Rick. Yes, I know we're coming up on the top of the hour, so we have gotten a number of questions. If any of you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A panel. If we don't have time to get to them, we'll have Nick or Rick reach out to you guys afterwards. We just got a question in that was one that a couple folks have asked, so we'll start with this one. This one's for Rick. How does the takedown service actually work?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, we have a global network of attorneys that we use. The service itself is within, there's a tab within Searchlight that says takedown. And so from an incident itself, you can click a takedown and you can launch it. That launch will then go out to this global network that we have. We can do takedown requests in 19 different languages. We give tracking, so acknowledged, remediated, validated steps all the way through the process to help clients do that. And you can see the time that it's taking for a takedown to occur.
Thank you. And with a couple minutes left, one for Nick. Are there any specific technical capabilities that you believe are must-haves?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good question. And when we think about the technical capabilities, I think that the most important piece is really around the data collection. You need to have capabilities that are going to help deal with the vast amounts of data that we're talking about and analyze it in more real time. So if there's one capability, that's probably number one in terms of a need. And then assuming that you have the ability to detect or to identify the different events that can take place, the second one is around the mitigation. Anything that you can do related to improving takedowns. As Rick said, some of them are easier than others to work with if it's something on Pastebin, for example. But even in those cases, there are a lot of examples where it can take a lot of time for an organization to go through the process of dealing with a impersonating account or app or site. In any of those cases, being able to know who it is at that respective digital channel and know how to maneuver through that process. While it's not a technical capability in some cases, there are some integrations, but in other cases, it's having ongoing relationships and partnerships with the right stakeholders. So those would be A and B for me.
Awesome. All right, so we're right at the top of the hour. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So thank you to everybody who attended today. Thank you definitely to Rick and Nick for the awesome presentation. For the questions we didn't get to, we'll respond to you offline. And just a quick housekeeping item, we will be sending you guys a recording of the session that will include the video recording and a link to download the slides to the email address you used to register. Anything else from Rick or Nick?
Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.